Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Geneva Cliffs Community Meeting number 1. I'm Amy Lene, Project Manager from the Boston Parks and Recreation Department. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time from your schedule to be here. I would like to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on the call and ask that you raise your hand if you'd like to say something. Okay, next slide, please. So I just have a few items to go over before we start the presentation. Please know that this meeting is being recorded so that it can be posted to the project webpage. It should be posted in about a week, and I've added the link for the project webpage in the chat in case you'd like to view this presentation again or share it with neighbors who are unable to attend. So during the presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and microphone muted. During the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. Next slide, please. We encourage everyone to share their questions and comments either verbally or in the chat. Please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly via email if you'd like to provide comments that way or discuss the project further. I've added my email to the chat as well. Next slide, please. So in a moment, our design team will give a short presentation followed by a listening and discussion session. If a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll address it after the presentation. If you would like to speak during the discussion session and you're joining via Zoom on a computer, just use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. If anyone is calling on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. Once we call on you, use *6 to unmute and mute again. Next slide, please. So we will start with an introduction of the project team and then an overview of the project schedule. Our design team will then present their analysis of the site context and existing conditions. And this will be followed by a listening and discussion session where we hope to hear how folks would like to use Geneva Cliffs in the future. And lastly, we'll go over the closing remarks and next steps. Next slide, please. So once again, I'm Amy Lene, Project Manager from Boston Parks. Also joining us from Boston Parks, we have Kathy Baker Eclipse, Director of the Capital Plan, and Michael McMillan, Community Outreach Coordinator. Michael will be moderating for the meeting tonight. Anthony Nguyen is our Mid-Dorchester liaison from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services and is a great resource for community concerns. So thanks, Anthony, for joining us. And then the Klopfer Martin Design Group is the landscape architecture firm working on the project. So joining us, we have Kaki Martin, Sharon Camaro, and Dora Mugerwa. Next slide, please. So this is the first community meeting for the Geneva Cliffs Improvement Project. I think some of you attended a meeting 2 years ago to discuss the site, and so we will be sharing a summary of the feedback from that meeting. We plan on holding a second engagement event in the spring. I think this will likely be an in-person event held at Geneva Cliffs. And then the third meeting will be sometime in the summer. And then during the fall and winter, our design team will develop construction documents, and we expect to start construction in early 2026 and complete the work in late 2026. The estimated cost of construction is $1.55 million. Next slide. So I did want to go ahead and share some updates that came out of that 2023 meeting. So we have learned that Eversource is not willing to sell off the parcels adjacent to Geneva Cliffs, but we are continuing the conversation about using their property for events and other activities and what their requirements will be for that to happen. The input we get tonight on how the community wants to use the site will be helpful in those conversations. And also in the conversation about the reclassification of urban wild to park. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of our approach to open space design, which includes community input, such as this meeting tonight, safety guidelines and regulatory guidelines, and the City of Boston priorities and the parks and recreation goals. Next slide. So City of Boston priorities include delivering exceptional constituent services, green and growing, family friendly, closing the racial wealth gap, and healthy and safe. Next slide. And then parks and recreation goals. So for all of our renovation projects, these are the department goals that guide the process. So they include creating spaces that are accessible and available to all. So thinking about all users and what features are best suited for the greatest accessibility. Spaces that have a diverse, balanced, and efficient mix of uses. A process that includes meaningful and inclusive community engagement. Spaces that incorporate adaptive and resilient landscapes. And last, promote connections between spaces and people. So with that, I will hand it over to Kaki Martin from Klopfer Martin Design Group.
Thanks, Amy, and good evening, everybody. We're really glad to be with you, and we're really excited to be working on a site as dramatic and compelling as Geneva Cliffs. We've enjoyed our visits, and frankly, I look forward to returning in the spring too, when the vegetation's re-emerging. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of pieces about sort of the context. These are sort of observations you probably all know yourselves. We just sort of like to diagram them and document them and cross-check with you that we've sort of captured everything. It helps us understand a place. Sharon, if you want to go to the next slide. And yeah, I'll just say in the chat, Amy had sort of given a prompt and some of you maybe hadn't been on yet, but we'd love to have you in the chat. Just feel free to sort of share a favorite memory of Geneva. That if that something comes to mind, please put it in the chat. We'd love to hear about it. So you all know here's Geneva, located right in the middle of this slide, and that dashed circle around it is showing a half a mile radius around the park, which equates to about a 10 to 15 minute walk. You can see the Fairmount line, sorry, moving through there, and it's very well connected with bus stops and some primary transit routes. So, we're really aware that Geneva is a place that's actually quite easy to get to. And also within that 10 to 15 minute walk, there are other, key open spaces within that 10 to 15 minute walk from Geneva Cliffs. We go to the next. And so we've now zoomed out a little bit. So beyond the 10 to 15 minute walk, the half mile, you're also seeing that outer circle of a mile, which is more like a 15 to 20 plus minute walk. Franklin Park is captured in that, some large, large key significant park for the city. And really there are many parks located within the half mile. We want to just also note that Tebrock Street Play Area, which is quite close to Geneva, as well as Ronan, which was just about at that 10 to 15 minute half mile range. Both of those are undergoing and improvements. So just for a little bit of context, in case you hadn't heard, those two parcels are also going to be improved. Next slide. And so not only are there a number of spaces there, but it's also an open space within that 10 to 15 minute walk. But it's also curious to us about what activities happen in those parks, and how does that sort of how that might inform how we all think about Geneva and discuss Geneva. So you can see the legend down at the bottom here. All of these spaces, there are quite a few green spaces that are community gardens. So lots of spaces here, many of which are community gardens. And then if we go to the next slide, we see the actual sort of playground and park spaces. And those include activities, everything from sort of passive places, passive lawn, to active play areas and sport courts. So there's really quite a variety of play, or excuse me, park programming in the park spaces within a 10 to 15-minute walk of Geneva. So quite a few community amenities. Okay, next slide. Another thing that we like to do is just sort of take a look back and understand a place. It helps us sort of, think about what the future could be when we look back. So Dora did some amazing um history digging, and we have a couple of images to share with you to just that we thought were interesting. Sharon, next slide. This is a map back to 1836. You can see in green the Geneva Cliffs site boundary, and you see that sort of Cedar Ave is blocked in there, and right in the middle you also see something indicated as a pond. We don't exactly know and haven't quite found documentation about it, but our hunch is that it could have been related to some stone quarrying, perhaps. Maybe one of you knows exactly what that pond was there for. But it's interesting because that sort of topographic change of that low point of the pond actually, in a way, sort of still resonates on the site today in certain ways. If we go to the next slide, we're moving several decades forward, and now we can see structures, sort of nearby. And in fact, on the site, you can see that the many parcels along Geneva have been kind of captured by one landowner. And you can see the sort of yellow objects and squares are structures. So we could see that there were structures on the site. And if we then blast forward very quickly, closer to about 100 years, is when you all really came into the picture, and particularly in the 90s, when the Greater Bowdoin Geneva Neighborhood Association formed this working group to advocate for Geneva Cliffs, and the Friends group was born. And early in the 2000s, Geneva Cliffs became designated as an urban wild with ownership by the Conservation Commission. And then really another significant moment was when the Friends group advocated to lead that work for improvements in that happened in 2008. Next slide. And really, I mean, it's amazing to look at these and what a difference there is. And so to see the site conditions from the early 2000s, and next slide, and then all of the advocacy work. Next slide, Sharon. The advocacy work that really led to these path upgrades and planting upgrades. This is an image of the planting plan document from that time. That led to the construction changes in 2008. Next slide. And which resulted in really these wonderful moments of walking paths that are still visible and very compelling today. Next slide. And you can really see that path network from the design plan really shows up even in the aerial. It's great. Next slide. And really the best, I can see that I haven't read all the chat, but I think some of these comments are coming up in the chat with favorite moments. We love these photos that Dora was able to find that really just show these moments of activation and coming together. It seems like Halloween. It really is. I can imagine how spooky this site would be at Halloween. Love seeing those photos, and then looks like there was also some stargazing events, and I'm sure many other events, but this idea that you all brought and activated this site is really wonderful. Next slide. And, just to acknowledge it, Amy has mentioned this, and, this was not a meeting we were a part of in 2023, but want to just sort of acknowledge the sort of what we understand to be 5 really key points that came out of that community meeting and the feedback, the summary of that feedback, that there was interested in trying to find ways to strategize continued public use of the Eversource parcel. This idea of keeping Geneva Cliffs special and unique, not like other parks, came up as a primary summary point. Keeping it wild, improving maintenance, lighting and accessibility, keeping trees and protecting the environmental habitats that may be present, and then, interest in feeling okay with a park designation if Geneva Cliffs, by doing that, could still retain its current character. Next slide. So Sharon, I'll toss it to you to talk a little about our site analysis.
Thank you. Great. So we'll just share some of our observations of the site. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, and so some of this will be repetition for you, but as Kaki said, we like to kind of diagram it, and you can also share with us if there's anything you see differently. Starting with topography, there is a substantial grade change across the site. The diagram here is showing the color gradation is indicating 5-foot increments. So there is a high point where the exposed ledge is above Geneva Ave, and then it slopes down towards Geneva Ave, and that grade change is about 35 feet difference. There's also a high point to the west of the site where we think maybe some of that potential quarrying may have happened. Our understanding is that the soil there is fill along with some rubble that has been brought to the site and dumped on the site. So that kind of character you can see in the vegetation as well, which we'll get to. So moving on to vegetation, we've located sort of 3 major zones of vegetation, and this doesn't get at every single tree on the site. Particularly, there are some of the trees that were planted in 2008 that you can still see, but these are sort of the big patterns that emerged, which is that there are at the sort of north corner of the site and along Geneva Ave there's an area that's really almost exclusively Norway maples. Then moving a little bit south, also along that slope above Geneva Ave, there's an area that's mostly natives, mostly oaks. And to the west in zone where the soils are sort of have been brought to the site, there are a lot of Norway maples and then also black locusts. And the trees there are not in as good health. So now we have some images of those areas. So here you can see the Norway maples. And these are mature trees. You can see some of them in those photos that Kaki showed from 2008. You can see that they were already there and mature then. And when we talk about Norway maples and call them invasive, one of the issues or our concerns is that they establish well and sort of almost exclusively they create this very deep shade and have a lot of service roots, and so you don't see really anything else growing there. At the same time, they also provide shade, and that's a function, and hold the soil. So moving to the south, some images of the native vegetation areas. It's mostly oaks. There's some birch in there, some small white pines. So in addition to the species diversity, there's also a little bit more of age diversity in here. So some larger trees and also some smaller trees. And then moving over to the west, this is the area that's mostly the Norway maples and black locusts, which are species that can tolerate the poor soil conditions. And the city arborist did come out and take a look at the site and observed that a lot of these trees are in poor health. So you can see that a little bit in some of these images. The one on the right, you can see there's sort of the bark is showing that there's sort of damage or sort of distress, and the kind of structure of the trees in a lot of cases is not kind of what you want to see in healthy trees. Additionally, in those areas, in the area with the kind of fill zone at the western portion of the site where there's understory, it's a lot of weedy species, bittersweet, which is kind of a vine that is quite aggressive and climbs over everything else, and other weedy kind of understory, mugwort, garlic mustard, etc. Um, Looking also at circulation, there are three entrances into the park. There's the main entrance with the archway along Geneva Ave. There's also an entrance to the north, and the entrance that is kind of the maintenance entrance that comes in along Cedar Ave, which is the name of the paved road with the maintenance gate. And it's a private way that with an interest shared by parks and the other property owners. We observe these steep sections, which are marked in red. There are also steps in some of these areas. So the paths are sort of, their character is fitting with an urban wild. It's not what you might see at a park where a priority is accessible pathways. So they're, as I'm sure you know, they're sort of stone dust or more of a packed earth surface and quite a bit steeper. And lastly, in the site analysis, we observed that there are kind of barriers in places. So whether these are visual barriers where kind of paths turn and there's a lot of enclosure from the vegetation, or also physical barriers in some places, which is the exposed ledge, the way that the paths in one location traverse that rock, which you can see in the photo on the right, the upper photo. And also these places where you just kind of can't see what's around the corner. And of course that changes seasonally. So the photos here are a little are starting to be into fall. So um, the site and how you perceive it is, we think, quite different in the winter when there's no leaves on the trees than in the summer or spring. Also, just we noted the fencing on three sides of the park. So at this point, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what matters to you at the park, your priorities for improvements. I'll just note we do also have a survey that is on the project website. So that's another opportunity. We'll be listening tonight. If there's more you want to say, we want to hear from you as well on the survey. So you can see the QR code to access it. It's on the project website, which Amy put in the chat. So yeah, we want to hear from you. Thank you.
I think Edward Cook, you've had your hand raised for a while. Can we unmute you?
Is there anyone from Eversource in this meeting?
There's not.
Okay. I think a big concern from the community, although it was only one bullet point, in one of the slides is the use of the community use for the land that Eversource has, which is flat, and that the Halloween parties and stargazing and a lot of other community activities that brought people into the park were held in those spaces. And my memory is, and Linda Laska can chime in here, the uses of those spaces, the Eversource space, for a long time, all that was required to get use of the access to that space by the community for these events was a phone call. And then at some point, lawyers from Eversource got involved, and um, they said, you know, we're worried about um, someone getting hurt and us being responsible. And so you can't use our space anymore for community activities. A guy named Jim Hunt Jr. is a VP at Eversource. He had worked, I think, for Menino, or maybe Flynn, Menino, I think. Um, and we contacted him, and he said, that's ridiculous what the lawyers are saying. The lawyers were also saying that there's a substation on their property that might be built out to be a larger substation. So we're not going to give access anymore for the community gatherings. And so we were in negotiation, some of us, with Eversource, and it seemed that something could be worked out, something like leasing that land to the city. So I'm moving into a question. Has it been brought up that the city could ask Eversource to lease the land, uh, that flat piece of land, to the city, so that the city would have the responsibility for the safety and so forth, and take that off of Eversource, uh, and allow us to use um, that piece of land for the community activities. Is there any communication between Parks and Rec and Eversource?
So there is, and that's sort of where we are now is talking with them about a use agreement so that they do allow events to happen on their space. And what that looks like is still to be determined, whether or not if that's an agreement with the city or with a community group using the space. So I think it's helpful again to hear your feedback on the topic, because that's informative for our conversations with them. And I think in the chat, Jeff had some other questions related to Eversource. So yeah, to answer the question about contacting them, we are in touch with them, and our goal is to then schedule another meeting with them shortly after this. I don't know if they've mentioned plans or timeline for their parcels for doing anything. And Kathy, I don't know if you have more intel on that, but my understanding is they just want to hold on to it for that potential future use.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding as well, is they're not actively looking to develop the site. And they're also not but they're also not willing to dispose of their real estate holdings at this point. It is zoned for open space purposes. So and if we ever heard rumblings that it was on the market, we would be the first one in line, and with trying to make an offer and preserve that for open space purposes. So it is something that we're currently tracking and continuing the conversation with Eversource to make sure that to the greatest extent possible, the community can use that space.
With whom at Eversource are you in touch? Is it lawyers?
It is a community intergovernmental liaison and his supervisor.
So is
Who I
that
believe
Jim
had several
Hunt?
conversations
You
with.
know, do you know if that's Jim Hunt?
No, it is not Jim Hunt, but my understanding is that he's aware of the conversations.
So, all right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And Edward. Linda, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, the one thing about Eversource that I don't know if anybody else has mentioned is that they said that they would be happy to trade that land for other land in the city. So if they're really that interested in this land, why is it that they can just, offer to go somewhere else? I find their urgency disingenuous.
I don't want to be throwing Eversource under the bus. I think they are like anyone, they have their limits of what they can and can't do and what their best practices are and their long-term plans. I do know that they have been very open with continuing this conversation, and I would like to keep that openness going. So I do just want to, we're trying to partner with them. So I do just want to make sure that we are, keeping that door open.
Good luck.
So I think it'd be great to hear, if people have thoughts on what does the future of the space look like and how would that benefit from, an agreement with Eversource or focused on the City of Boston parcels, and improving those. Do people see specific activities? Looks like we have Veronica with their hand raised.
And there's also Amy in the chat from Vivian, sort of a question about 1.5 million budget.
Oh, okay, sure. I can answer that after. Veronica, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I live in the neighborhood, but I didn't even know that events happen there. So I've actually never been to Geneva Cliffs. I've heard it discussed in the GBGNA meetings and about getting it cleaned up and stuff, but like I said, I've never been up there. Really interested to go up there now. But my question is there a driveway to go up there, or where do folks park if they want to visit?
Yeah, so there's a access road up that Cedar Ave private way, which is really for maintenance vehicle access, and that has
Mhm.
a swing gate. So really, I think parking tends to happen on the streets in the surrounding areas.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think thanks for coming to this meeting. I'm glad you
Yeah,
joined us.
yeah.
And I think that also the opportunity when the weather's a little warmer to have, a site walk with folks from the community. We can show the sort of things that we've been showing on plans in person. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that. And I
Def-
think that might get you thinking about ways that it can be used too.
Yes. So, I go to Ronan a lot. I see Tab Rock. It's small, but it's a little place where kids can play that's enclosed, which is great. Um, but there's not a lot of places where you could just go and have a picnic. So maybe like obviously doing events there, but having like a picnic area. And if there could be parking, that would be great. And it doesn't have to be a lot of parking, maybe like 10 spaces. People, they can't walk up there, can just easily get up there and, walk around the park if they want to do that to exercise and stuff like that. Another thing that I wanted to mention is I think you said earlier in the meeting that people were dumping rubble. Is that what you said?
That's what we believe happened. Yeah, historically, before it became, I think before it became city property, it was, you know, I don't know if this was illegal dumping or people were just using it for that purpose, but there's signs of just a bunch of kind of debris and chunky boulders and things that aren't naturally occurring, so they appear to have been brought in, which
Oh,
has unfortunately made the soils, not ideal for growing trees, healthy trees, and that's why we're seeing sort of this decline in that particular area of the site.
okay, but that's not happening now because my suggestion would be to just maybe put some cameras up there and ticket people when they're dumping things.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Yeah, I think it's not an issue now, thankfully.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Veronica.
Thank you, Veronica.
So Vivian's question about the 1.5 million budget. I think that has the potential to do a number of upgrades to the site, in terms of, the path improvements. I think it can also include planting new trees, doing some earthworks if we do want to sort of flatten out some of the area that's the mound with the poor quality gravelly fill. I think there's sort of the unknown piece of, accessibility and what we're trying to achieve with that, because it's obviously a very slope site. I think the other question is, when we put out a project to bid, do we want some considerations for a couple follow-up years of invasive vegetation management? Because we could certainly include that as an option. So,
And so, Amy, I'll just add,
oh
I
yeah,
think the questions about what is the money going toward, that's what this process is sort of about. We want to hear from you. And so Amy gave a list of things that we've all been thinking about. And so then the question is like, how do we take that list? And Veronica had a great suggestion, like, gee, would it be having a flat picnic area? So that's sort of what we're trying to do is make that list, and then with all of you prioritize, so that then we can kind of calibrate, how much of the priority list can we achieve with the $1.5 million that's been allocated. So that's what we're sort of kicking off tonight with Amy and our team, the Parks Department and our team, to work with you to figure that out. But we we know there's a long list of sort of needs and wishes, and as we get more into conversations, we can also help kind of calibrate and weight them. But that's something we'll want to hear from you on, about what are your priorities as users of the space and friends of the space and longtime friends of the space.
yeah. Thanks, Kaki. That's a good way to put it. Let's see, Harris, Hardaway.
All right. Oh, there we
Yep,
go. Hello.
there we go. Hi.
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 So I'm not sure if you guys can see me or not.
We
Hold on,
can.
let me just put this up here because I'm driving. But I'm sorry I was there a little earlier, but some connectivity issues and switching from office to car. And I didn't get a chance to hear the list of things that you guys were going to do, but I know we did this like a year and a half ago, I think. And I'm hoping that some of the things we discussed before are on that list for what could be done for it. Is that the case?
So yeah, to go back to Kaki's point, we actually have come here asking what folks want to see done to
Oh,
the
okay.
site.
I
Um,
misunderstood. Apologies.
no worries. And so we did summarize the feedback from that last meeting. And thank you for joining us again tonight and for working through the connectivity issues. So I think maybe we do want to go back to that slide real quick. This kind of summary, the bullet points that we have on the screen now are, kind of this focus on keeping it unique, keeping some of that wild character,
Mm,
keeping trees. So I think those were certainly themes that we heard in that last meeting.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, so because I think one of the biggest kind of questions, at least in my mind, is, do you want to really preserve the tree canopy as much as it is, essentially, even though knowing that we have these sort of poor health trees in the poor soils, or is it worth removing some of those, bringing in quality soils and new trees, and really kind of looking more towards the future? Is like, this is the investment to create a quality tree canopy that will have longer health, like lifespan, and create shade in the future for future generations. It's sort of maybe a big decision to make, but I think that also might be something, again, like looking at those on site will help sort of clarify for folks. But
And
Yeah, I
Harris,
mean,
Harris, I
yeah,
also
go
want to
ahead.
make sure, I just want to make sure you also saw the QR code for the survey, which will also sort of lead you through a bunch of questions. So I want to make sure you saw that too.
I didn't, but thanks for bringing it up. And because I'm driving, I can't click it.
Yeah, okay.
But maybe I
Yeah,
could get the
please be
link
careful,
to it.
Harris. Please don't attend a meeting and drive, Harris, please.
No, I have my hands. I have my hands.
Okay.
yeah, and I'll send that link out to everyone
Okay.
as an email, so don't worry. Yeah, we'll get that to
Oh,
you.
Okay.
that'd
So
be cool.
that'll be a like really clear way. We hope to sort of take you through a series of questions and prompts about sort of ideas, and then also add in ideas we haven't thought of, but we're hoping to use that survey as a way to really take the kind of the pulse of what everybody's feeling.
Yeah, I think that the survey is a great idea. I do want to say that I have had the opportunity in the past to be up there for some small festivals or events, and it's just like this little oasis that you don't even realize is there, and it's beautiful. So if
Yay.
there's a way that we could keep some of the urban wildness to it, but also make it accessible and palatable to everyone, I think it's a great place to see the stars and to do science things with youth, or to bring cultural events to life, because it is so secluded and it's a way to escape. And a lot of people might need that to just relax, since there's a lot of concrete everywhere else. But I do want to make sure that our youth are included. And if there's a way that we could do something with them, there's a lot of youth in this area, and Main Streets that I represent has had the opportunity to work with them through our Bowdoin Geneva Public Safety and Mental Health Task Force. And so we're always trying to bring them into the fray so that they can have an opportunity to use their voice, because a lot of people don't give them that chance.
That's great. And please, spread the word about the survey. We really, when you get Amy's email and have that link, please share it. And I think Amy mentioned earlier, our hope is that our next gathering together will be in the spring, and we're hoping it could be on site. And so here's people like you who are connected and directly working with youth. We would love you to help encourage them to be at the meeting. That would be great.
Definitely. And the task force is made up of different groups, like organizations, and a few residents, and then folks from the city as well. So, maybe it would be something where you could come and talk to some of the folks at the task force. But definitely, I think it would be great for us to just do a day where we all could just be up there, because it is beautiful. And you get inspired when you're up there. So it's hard to talk about it when you're in this virtual. And I don't want to take up too much time about how beautiful it is, but it's really exciting and it's unique. So yeah, in the spring, it would be great to go up there.
Great.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I do just want to just explain a little about the 2023 community meeting that we had and the difference between that meeting and today. And the biggest difference is that we have a designer under contract right now, and they're going to be transforming these comments into a physical plan to make those improvements. We were, clearly several steps away from having that contract in place, but we did want to reach out to the community to try to get a better sense of what we needed to start thinking about as we engaged a designer. And now we have a designer. So it might feel like you're repeating some of the comments, but it is all just building on itself, and we're ready to take action at this point. So those are the biggest difference between that previous meeting and today.
Thank you so much for explaining that.
See, Edward Cook.
Yeah, I want to go back to Vivian Gerard's comments about the budget. Does the fee for this design group come out of that 1.5 million?
No, that's just for construction, that 1.5.
Okay. I don't recall seeing on any of the maps Coppin Square Park. Is that on one of the maps you were showing of open spaces?
I think might be right around that 1 mile mark.
Yeah, we can double check here.
It's
Yes,
at the bottom.
it's in the
Yeah,
1 mile mark.
it's the little one in the bottom. Yeah.
Okay. I don't see it.
It's not labeled, but it is there.
Okay. So I'd like to, as the president of the Friends of Coppin Square, and several of my board members are on this meeting.
Sorry,
including-
Coppin Square. I think that is in the 10 to 15. I thought you
Okay.
said Codman Square.
Yeah, same.
No, not Codman.
Okay, yeah.
Coppins.
Coppins.
I think it might
We
just
will,
be
if we
just
miss
It's right
it,
outside. Yeah,
looks
yeah,
like
see it.
we will follow up on it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say to Kathy Baker Eclipse, you and I have been in, I'm the president of the
Yep.
Friends of Coppin Square. And we've
I
been,
know I owe you a response. So I will
okay.
take some
And
time tomorrow.
I just want to point out that we've been working on Coppin Square, the renovation of this tiny little square, for about 10 years. And we have a budget of only 1.3 million. And, I'm beginning to despair that the project will be completed in my lifetime. So Kathy, that's my agenda when we talk. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, it's good to hear from you. Yeah, I don't. I think this project, at least, we feel confident that we'll be able to move forward.
This is a very important part to us because there was an MIT group that came and did a study of the neighborhood, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the things they found is that the open spaces, I think Ms. Barros was talking about how few there are, Veronica. This neighborhood has the fewest open spaces of any comparable neighborhood in the city. So this is a very important space for us.
Yeah, definitely.
I just want to say that this meeting has been like a breath of fresh air because you guys have been very thorough, and I wasn't at the 2023 meeting, but it sounds like you guys heard the voices of everyone and you guys are doing, what the people said. I think that it's just it's nice to see. And it's like you guys love the park as much as the people that have been there. And I think that, the plans that you guys have, it sounds like it's on point with everything. So, I mean, I do think that, Amy, you mentioned the soil, and if most of it is bad and the trees that are on it are bad, then maybe we should think about resoiling, because then we can plant new plants, right? Not trees, but other kinds of plants that would be green as well. So
Yeah, no, thanks, Veronica.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great having folks like you come to meetings. So we'll be all doing this together. It's great.
I just had another question, if it's okay.
Oh yeah.
So I was at I don't remember how big it is up there. I don't want to take away from the wild, but one of the things that is difficult in the area that I've noticed is uh, coming together. So that place has been used as a place to have like a couple hundred people. But on Truman Parkway, I think it is, in Hyde Park, it's really beautiful park, and it has like a mini half shell.
Oh yeah, I know
Um,
that one.
and it's just, I mean, they have really nice events there, and it's always family. So I don't know if there's something of some scale that could create like a little half shell with a stage where, you know, whether it's a protest or it's a, hey, we're doing a kite festival, or we're gonna have artists, because it's a very international neighborhood, so artists come from all over, and people could just come together. So that's just something that popped in the head, and if it's possible, include in a drawing, that'd be cool.
Yeah, we can look at that. I think there might be interesting ways to create a space that can accommodate events, but also sort of keeps the sort of wooded feel, without doing a really wide scale clearing. So we can certainly study that more. Let's see, Edward Cook again.
Yeah, again, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I forgot half of my question last time. The 1.5 million, who, how did that come about? Friends of Coppin Square, we worked for years to get the money from from Parks and Rec, from the capital budget for Parks and Rec, uh, for the renovation of Coppin Square. And I could take hours explaining all the meetings that took, public meetings and private meetings and whatnot. Um, so how did that process, what was the process for coming up with that money? Maybe this is a Kathy question.
You want me to take that one, Amy?
Well, I'll let Kathy take that one.
Yeah. So I think that that number is probably more than what is needed. But that was based on a sketch that was prepared, that was shared with us, that I think was prepared by a design firm at the request of the Friends of Geneva Cliffs. I think that might be correct. That showed a much more active recreation site and using some of the Eversource property. So I I think we are unlikely to have a playground in this space, given just the accessibility and tree cover, and the desire to keep this space wild and unique. So we may not, that may not be the final construction budget that we put out. If the project does not need to spend $1.5 million, we won't make it spend $1.5 million. We want to make sure that we're doing what the site needs and what the community wants. So we have 1.5, whether we use that all is TBD. And then it would get reabsorbed back into the capital budget.
So
But we are we don't want to let go of it yet.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not advocating that. But so was the 1.5, was that in the budget passed to city council?
It is, yeah, it's a city capital line item. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you, Kathy.
Linda, do you have a question?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was going to have to happen is the designation of the space, and I guess the Conservation Commission, and it was set up as an urban wild, and now we're talking about making it a park. Has that work been done? And is that something that still has to happen? Or does it not have to happen anymore? I'm confused as to what the status of the space is.
Yeah, that's a great question. And because I know that was a big topic of the conversation at the last meeting. So um, the way we're looking at it now is it's really kind of driven by the ideal sort of uses of the site. So um, depending on again, sort of what we hear from the community and how they want to use the space. There are, I think you're pretty familiar, Linda, the differences in terms of permanent events versus and trash pickup, those kinds of things. So we were less focused maybe on differentiating that in this conversation, but really sort of getting the feedback and letting that drive that discussion. So that's where it stands. It's not decided, I guess, either way at this point.
But there are some of our colleagues from the Conservation Commission on this call, so they're listening as well.
See, Jeff, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm with Ed on Coppin Square board, and I'm also a proponent. Well, I'm on the board of the Friends of Ronan Park, and we got a measly 500,000 to redo the basketball courts in the upper park. And we're working with parks to try to figure out the best way to utilize that money. But it just seems like 1.5 is for Geneva Cliffs is a lot of money. When are we going to see those plans? It just seems like a lot of money to put into something that doesn't have recreational space.
Sure. And I think to Kathy's point, that was a budget request that was based on a more robust redesign. So there was actually like a formal playground. And that I think that was at least a couple of years ago. So I think now that we've heard more of a desire for keeping that wild character and maybe less heavy-handed moves, it does seem like that might be more than is necessary. But I think, again, there's maybe an opportunity to incorporate some extended invasive vegetation management. So I think there's worthwhile uses for it, I'm going to say, even if it's less about the immediate construction. But I think so. Our process for this design is that we'll have this meeting. I think we'll do the site visit, site walk with folks. Hoping to continue to get feedback also through this online survey. At the second design meeting, we would typically show like 3 different sort of options or ideas for the site and get feedback on that. And then for the third meeting, we would have a final design that we would share, and that would be what we would then move forward with for the construction. So that's typically our process, but we're really hoping to get that feedback along the way and make sure that it's aligning with everyone's vision for the site. So that's the goal.
Thank you.
And then there isn't, sorry, go ahead.
This wasn't so much about the design part, and I also would not curtail the budget for Geneva Cliffs, but it's kind of lopsided, and I'm wondering how those decisions are being made, as Ed asked.
Yeah, so I just want to speak to Ronan Park for 1 second. There's a meeting in 2 weeks. You'll see some familiar faces, I think, in that meeting as well. That's February 25th. I put a link to that meeting in the chat, so please attend that. And the budget for Ronan Park, the scope for Ronan Park is going to include the playground, the splash pad, and the basketball court resurfacing. The lights were just recently redone. So that budget. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it's much closer to 1.5 than 5. It's not $500,000.
I don't remember off the top of my head either, Kathy, but
Yeah,
it's
in the 1.5
yeah.
area. So it's much closer to the budget for Geneva Cliffs if there was active recreation. And that work is kicking off. There is another project at Ronan Park that is specifically for a wall repair that is on the southern property end, and I think that is under $500,000 that's being allocated for that. So
I'm aware
there's a
of
lot of work going on at
I'm aware
Ronan
of that.
Park.
I'm wondering who makes these decisions for us.
It is, I'm the director of the capital plan, so I put the capital plan together. There are a lot of factors that go into determining what the budget is. It's what the scope of the work is, what the conditions are, if there are walls, if there's other infrastructure that we need to be looking at. So we're taking a guess at what we think it is going to be. I think we overestimated here at Geneva Cliffs. But I think the budget for Coppins is still right on, given its scope, which is a fountain and some trees and lawn, and some paving. So there are a lot of different factors. Topography makes a big difference. Site access makes a big difference. So there's a lot of different factors that are going into our thinking about what these budgets are.
Thank you.
But please come in 2 weeks. Keep an eye out for
And
that.
I just also want to tag on to what Amy and Kathy have been saying about Geneva. I would also sort of add that all of the ledge and the topography at Geneva Cliffs, which is what makes it what we're all so excited about, what makes it so one of the things that makes it so magical and unique, also makes it, frankly, a challenging site to do construction. So Kathy, my hunch is that was part of your consideration too. So
I think
yes,
that's right, too.
there's some programmatic differences perhaps, but it will not be the easiest site to, for example, there's certain areas where if everyone really felt a path in a certain area was just really a priority, there's a lot of rock and ledge, and it's a different type of construction than Ronan, for example, which is
And
mostly
that
green
goes
lawn
to
and
that
trees.
site access. In order
That's
to
right.
access the
That's
northern
right.
side of
That's right.
Geneva Cliffs, you're really limited in the type of construction equipment that you can bring back
That's right.
there. And all of that makes developing or doing construction in a site like that much more challenging. So
That's right.
there's a lot of
A lot of things that
factors
go
in
into
site construction.
Yeah.
So I don't want to rush anyone, but if there's any other comments or questions, happy to take those. Also happy to have follow up with the email via my email.
We saw your timeline. When's the next community meeting, and how are the decisions being made?
So we are anticipating a spring meeting, and I think we'll work out, the exact date and in-person event sort of thing. I think in-person events are great for looking at the site, but less practical sometimes for sharing drawings. So we may be doing sort of the site walk, and then taking another opportunity to share the sort of 3 or a couple of concept plans. And that date we haven't finalized either. So I'll certainly email everyone who's on this call and from our contact list and let you know what we think for that date. But I'm thinking probably April or so.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
Thanks, Linda. Oh, yep.
one more question. Can I get a copy of the recorded meeting?
Yeah, so we'll be posting that on our project webpage, and I will send that link out so you can watch it. And it will also include the slides from this presentation and the notes. So we'll share that in the next week or so.
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon.